My name is Anna Petrova, and I'm an archaeologist specializing in Soviet architecture and anomalous historical sites. What I'm about to tell you happened to me in October 2024, when I set out to investigate an abandoned village in Ukraine. The village was located 30 kilometers from the Chernobyl exclusion zone. It was precisely this proximity to the epicenter of the 1986 disaster that caught my attention. I was studying the effects of radiation on historical objects, and the local legends about the house where time flows differently seemed like the perfect case for investigation. The road to the village was terrible. My Jeep bounced over potholes as I made my way through the overgrown forest. The GPS had stopped working long ago, typical for these parts. Radiation affects electronics in unpredictable ways. When I finally reached the village, the sun was already setting. The village was dead in the literal sense, half-destroyed houses, streets overgrown with weeds, not a single living soul. But one building immediately caught my attention. The house stood at the edge of the village, 2 stories tall with a red tile roof. It looked wrong. Too well preserved for these parts. The paint hadn't peeled, the windows weren't broken, and weeds didn't even grow around the foundation. I parked near the house and took out my dosimeter. The device began crackling. Radiation levels were elevated but not critical. Strange how the radiation seemed to avoid the house entirely. A man emerged from a nearby half-destroyed house. Thin, with anxious eyes, he introduced himself as Mikhail Sokolov, a local historian, one of the few who occasionally visited these parts. "Are you American?" he asked, noticing my equipment. "No, I'm from Kiev. But I work with an international research group," I replied. "I study the effects of the Chernobyl disaster on historical objects." Mikhail shook his head. "This house, it's not like the others. People say time flows differently inside it. The Volkov family disappeared here in 1986, right during the Chernobyl accident." "During the accident?" I asked. "That's interesting. Could the radiation somehow affect the perception of time?" Mikhail shrugged. "I don't know. But after Chernobyl, a lot of strange things happened. This house is one of them. We entered the house with flashlights. There had been no electricity for decades. The hallway was surprisingly clean, no dust, no cobwebs. My dosimeter fell silent, which was strange considering the readings outside. The radiation doesn't penetrate inside," I muttered, checking the device. "That's impossible." Mikhail stopped at the staircase. "Do you hear that?" I listened. First silence, then children's laughter, very quiet, as if coming from far away. "Upstairs," Mikhail said. "From the nursery. But no one's been there since 1986. We climbed the stairs. The door to the nursery was slightly ajar, and soft, warm light spilled through the crack. I pushed the door open and froze. 2 children were playing in the room, a boy and a girl, about 7 or 8 years old. But they were moving incredibly slowly, like in slow motion. The girl was picking up a doll, and this movement lasted a full minute. "My God," I whispered. "Are these Kolya and Masha Volkov?" Mikhail nodded, not taking his eyes off the children. "They've been playing for almost 40 years. I tried to enter the room, but as soon as I crossed the threshold, my movements immediately slowed down. The air became thick like honey. It took enormous effort to step back. Time here has almost stopped," I said, taking out my notebook. "Perhaps this is connected to the effects of radiation on what? On space? On time?" A sound from the upper floor interrupted my thoughts. Footsteps, muffled voices. We went up to the parents' bedroom. What I saw there shocked me even more. A man and woman in bed were reliving the same scene over and over, waking up, looking at each other fearfully, getting up, going to the window, and it would all start again. A time loop, I whispered. They're trapped in the moment of their disappearance. I approached the window to see what had frightened them so much. In the yard stood people dressed in radiation protection suits. Chernobyl liquidators. They came to evacuate the family, Mikhail said. But something went wrong. We went down to the kitchen. Here time flowed almost normally, only the clock on the wall showed different times, and their hands moved at different speeds. Mikhail, I said, the house must have a basement. If this is connected to radiation, the source of the anomaly might be down there. We found the basement door behind the kitchen. As soon as we started going down, I noticed that the house around us was changing. The paint became brighter, the walls newer. We're moving into the past, I said, checking my dosimeter. It was showing increasingly high radiation levels. A surprise awaited us in the basement. A man was working there, a craftsman in 1930s work clothes. He was laying bricks, but moving backward, as if someone was playing film in reverse. Gavrila, Mikhail whispered. He built this house. The craftsman's voice echoed off the walls, cursed place. A church stood here. Shouldn't have built a house on holy ground. We went down even further. Under the house's foundation, the remains of an old church were revealed, and beneath it even more ancient structures with strange symbols. These aren't Christian symbols, I said, studying the stone carvings. This is much older. When Mikhail touched one of the symbols, the house shuddered. My dosimeter went crazy, the readings were off the charts. What did you do? I screamed. Time in the house began to speed up and slow down chaotically. We ran upstairs, but the house seemed to mock us. Corridors became longer, doors led to the wrong places. In the nursery, the children noticed us. Now they were moving at normal speed, but their toys had turned into bones. Now you'll stay with us, the girl said in an adult's voice. Forever. In the bedroom, the Volkov parents finally saw us. Do you see them too? The father asked. The liquidators outside the window? They came after the explosion, the mother added. But when they entered the house, something happened. Time broke. I was beginning to understand. The radiation interacted with something that already existed in this place. Something ancient. We tried to find an exit, but the house wouldn't let us go. Every attempt to leave the building ended with us finding ourselves in another room. I returned to the basement, to the ancient symbols. Using my flashlight, I studied them carefully. This is an observatory, I said. An ancient time observatory. People observed the movement of celestial bodies and studied time. In the center of the basement stood a strange mechanism, like a clock but with many hands and discs. When I shone light on it, the symbols on the walls began to glow. Radiation from Chernobyl activated the ancient mechanism, I realized. The house became a time trap. The ghosts of everyone who had ever been caught in the house began to appear around us. Liquidators, the Volkov family, craftsman Gavrila, even ancient priests. Free us, they pleaded. The ghosts surrounded us in a tight circle. Mikhail grabbed a chunk of stone from the floor. Anna, do something, he shouted, swinging the stone at the face of a liquidator in a protective suit. The ghost hissed and retreated, but others immediately advanced. I bent over the ancient mechanism, directing my flashlight beam at the complex interweaving of gears and levers. This really was a time machine, but primitive, operating on principles that science didn't yet understand. Hold on, Mikhail. I shouted, studying the mechanism. Most of the parts were in place, but something was clearly preventing it from working. The ghost of craftsman Gavrila suddenly materialized next to me, but he wasn't aggressive. On the contrary, he was pointing to the center of the mechanism. Akinak. He wheezed. Scythian Akinak, stuck, for centuries. I looked more closely and saw it between the main gears was wedged a short iron blade. An ancient Scythian sword dagger covered with greenish patina. Mikhail. The builder's ghost is helping us. I shouted. Mikhail looked back without stopping his fight against the other spirits. What's he saying? The Akinak is blocking the mechanism. I wrapped my hands around the ancient sword's handle. The metal was cold as ice, and strange sparks ran along it. This is a Scythian artifact. Someone deliberately blocked the time machine. The sword wouldn't budge. Centuries of rust had fused it with the gears. Mikhail, seeing my struggles, distracted himself from the ghosts for a second. Use the stone, he threw me the granite fragment. I began carefully tapping the base of the blade. With each blow, the mechanism shuddered, and the ghosts became more aggressive. They don't want us to free them. Mikhail realized. They're afraid of disappearing. Finally, after a particularly strong blow, the Akinak shifted. I gripped the handle with both hands and pulled with all my strength. The metal cut my palms, but I didn't let go. With a loud grinding sound, the ancient sword flew out of the mechanism. The gears began to turn slowly, making a melodic chiming. The house trembled. It worked. I shouted, pressing the Scythian Akinak to my chest. It was surprisingly light and warm, as if alive. Time in the house began to normalize. The ghosts stopped attacking and looked at their hands in amazement as they became more and more transparent. The children in the nursery finally began to age. In seconds they turned into teenagers, then adults, and finally dissolved with expressions of peace on their faces. "Thank you," the girl whispered as she disappeared. "We waited so long." The Volkov parents were also freed from their time loop. They looked at us with gratitude and dissolved into the air. We ran out of the house just in time. The building was crumbling, but slowly, as if time was still struggling with reality. Now, several months later, I'm recording this story in my office in Kiev. My report on the house at the edge of time has attracted interest from the international scientific community. My American colleagues are particularly interested in the connection between radiation and temporal anomalies. Mikhail and I haven't met since, but I know he's alive. Sometimes journalists call me, asking me to tell them about what happened in Temnoy. Most don't believe it. But I know the truth. The Chernobyl disaster changed more than just the region's ecology. It awakened forces that had been sleeping for millennia. And who knows how many more such places are waiting for their researchers. Grass now grows where the house stood. But sometimes, locals say, in the full moon you can see a faint glow there. Radiation? Or echoes of time that was once broken and repaired? I plan to return there next spring. I have a theory about how ancient time mechanisms might help us understand the consequences of nuclear disasters. Perhaps this will help other victims of similar anomalies too. After all, time isn't just a dimension. It's a force we're only beginning to understand. End of recording. Date, January 15th, 2025. Anna Petrova, Candidate of Historical Sciences, Kiev National University.